And need it be pointed out that the sixth verse is itself found in the Rig Veda 1:164:20, and it is repeated in the Atharva Veda, and the passage is so popular a one that Katha 3:1 and Mundaka 3:2 also quote it. These verses bring out the distinction of God and soul, Isha and Anisa, as the spectator and enjoyer respectively. The soul enjoys and performs karma while encased in the body tree. But though God is immanent in the soul and in the body, yet the works and their fruit do not cling to him and taint him. After the due eating of the fruits, and souls know the greatness of God and his own insignificance, then his sufferings cease. The previous mantra, 4-5, is also a famous and much debated passage, and it is badly translated by Professor Max Mueller. The translation by G.R.S. Mead and Chattopadhyaya is literal and correct. I, that one unborn, Aja, soul, sleeps in the arms of one unborn, nature, Pradhana, enjoying her of nature, red, white, and black, who brings forth multitudinous progeny like herself. But when her charms have been enjoyed, he, soul, quits her, Prakriti, side, the unborn other, Anyata, Lord. There is absolutely no mistaking this plain statement of the three Padarthas as eternal, as well as their relation, and all three are called unborn, Aja, or uncreated. But the word to be noted here is the word other, Anya, which is almost a technical term, or catchword to mean God, the Supreme, and it occurs again in 5.1. In the unperishable and infinite highest Brahman, wherein the two Vidya, Vijnana Atma, and Advidya are hidden, the one, Avidya, perishes, the other, Vidya, is immortal, but he who controls both Vidya and Avidya is another, Anyatha, and in the subsequent verses, this another is clearly pointed to be the only one God, without a second, the ruler of all, the generator of all, and the supporter, ripener of all. This forms the subject of discussion in the hands of Badarayana in 1.2.21, and the famous passage in Bandaranyaka is referred to. He who dwells in Atma Vijnana and different from Atma, whom the Atma does not know, whose body Atma is, and who rules Atma within. He is thy Atma, the ruler within, the immortal. 3.7.22. In 6.6 also God is called the Anya, the other. It occurs again in Gita 15:17. The previous verse postulates two entities of matter and soul, and the next verse proceeds to postulate another. But there is another, namely the Supreme Being, called Paramatma, who, being the everlasting Ishvara and pervading the three worlds, sustains them. That the very use of the word is solely to emphasize God's transcendency over the world of matter and of souls, as against people who only postulated two Padarthas, or would identify God, the Supreme Ishvara, with matter or soul, is fully brought out in the next verse. As I transcend the perishable, Pradhana, and as I am higher than even the imperishable soul, I am celebrated in the world and sung in the Vedas as Purushottama. The commonest fallacy that is committed when the eternality of matter and souls is postulated is in fancying that this in any way affects God's transcendency and immanency. Though he pervades all and envelopes all, creates and sustains, and takes them back again into himself, though he is the God in the fire, the God in the water, the God who has entered the whole world, in plants and trees and in everything else, 2.17, yet he stands behind all time and all persons, 7.16, beyond all tattvas, verse 15. He is the one God, Ekodeva, hidden in all beings, all-pervading, the Antaratma of all things, watching over all works, dwelling in all beings, the witness, the perceiver, the only one, Nirguna being, 6.11. And in verse 16 he is called the first cause, himself uncaused, the all-knower, the master of nature and man, and by the supreme statement, Ekohi Rudra Nadvitiya Tashte, there is only one Rudra, they do not allow a second. The complete subordination of all other things to him is clearly postulated. There is nothing else in his presence, as no asat can subsist in the presence of the sat, as no darkness can subsist in the presence of light, and light he is called 312. The light by which all other lights, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the lightnings are lighted, 614, and he is the great Purusha, like the sun in luster, beyond darkness, 3:8. There is only one other passage which we have to quote while we are dealing with the three eternal postulates of this Upanishad. These are the verses 8 and 9 in the first Adhyaya itself. In these also the distinctions between the Supreme God and the bound soul as Isha and Anisha, Jna and Ajna, and the third, Pradana, unborn, though perishable and ever-changing, are finely drawn. And in dealing with the personality of God, who is called in the Upanishads as Deva, Hara, Vashi, Shiva, Purusha, Brahman, Paramatma, Isha, and Ishvara, etc., we have to remark that the Upanishad makes no distinction between a higher and a lower Brahman. Rather, there are no statements made about the lower god or gods, except one verse in 5.3, where the Supreme Lord and Mahatma is said to have created the lords, and Brahma, or Hiranyagarbha, is referred to as such a lord. But every statement made to God by any of the names we have mentioned above clearly refers to the one without a second, the highest Brahman, who is also Nirguna, and in various passages the highest being is said to create, sustain, and destroy the worlds. What some of these people would not believe is how a being addressed as Hara and Shiva, Isha and Ishvara could be the Nirguna absolute Brahman, and they frequently associate this name with the Rudra or Shiva of the Hindu Trinity. But it will be news to these people that even the Rudra of the Trinity is Nirguna and not Saguna. Absolutely no passage could be found in any of the Upanishads, or even in the Puranas and the Itihasas, in which even the Trinity Shiva or Rudra is called Saguna. Saguna means having bodies, qualities formed out of Prakriti, and when Prakriti is itself resolved into its original condition and reproduced by this Trinity, Rudra, this Prakriti could not act as his vestment. But the Rudra and Shiva of our Upanishad is clearly set forth in our Upanishads as the fourth, Chaturtham and Turiyam, transcending the Trinity, and the secondless, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, Ananda, Rupam, Amritam, Yad Vibhuti, Santam, Shivam, Advaitam. Taittiriya Upanishad, Shivam, Santam, Advaitam, Chaturtham, Manyante, Ramatapini, Jayatisanam, Pradyayedavam, Pradyayadavyam, Sarvamidam, Brahma, Vishnu, Rudrandrashte, Sharve, Shamprasuyante, Sharvani Chandriyanicha, Sahabhutai, Nakaranam, Karanam Data Dhyata, Karanantu, Dhyayeya, Sharvaiswarya, Sampana Sharvaiswarya, Shambhurakasha Madhye, Shiva Eko Dhyayayat, Shivankara Sharvam, Anyat Parityaya, Atharvasika. Adore the most adorable Ishana, Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, Indra, and others have an origin. All the senses originate with the elements. The first cause and cause of causes has no origin. The bestower of all prosperity, the Lord of all, Shambho, he should be contemplated in the middle of the Akasha, Shiva, and one alone should be contemplated, the doer of good. All else should be given up. Atharvashika. The mystical and immutable one, which being composed of three letters, A-U-M, signify successively the three Vedas, the three states of life, Jagra, Svapna, and Shushupti, and three worlds, heaven, hell, and earth, three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Rudra, and by its nasal sound, Ardhamatra, is indicative of thy fourth office as the Supreme Lord of all, Parameshvara, ever expresses and sets forth thy collective forms, Mahimna Stotra. And the same mistake is committed by outsiders in supposing that the God of the Shaivas is only one of the Trinity, Any book in Tamil and Sanskrit taken at random will at once disillusion him, and he will find that the only God held up for the highest worship is the highest Nirguna Paramashiva, and not one of the Trinity. Great confusion is caused in the use of the words Nirguna and Saguna by translating them into impersonal and personal respectively, and Europeans themselves are not agreed as to the use of these words. According to Webster, the word personal implies limitation, but other eminent persons like Emerson, Lotze, etc., say that there is no such implication. Till the acceptation of these words are therefore settled, we should not make confusion worse confounded by rendering Nirguna and Saguna as impersonal and personal. So far there can be no doubt on the nature of the Godhead described in our Upanishad. When there was no darkness, nor day, nor night, nor Sat, nor Asat, then Shiva alone existed. Shiva Eva Kevala, that is the absolute, that the adorable condition of the Lord. From that too had come forth the wisdom of old. Jnana Shakti 4:18. He is the eternal and infinite, unborn being, partless, actionless, tranquil, without taint, without fault, the highest bridge to immortality 6:19. He is the causeless first cause, the all-knower, the all-pervader, the creator, sustainer, and liberator of the world, the end and aim of all religion and of all philosophy. He is the Ishvara of Ishvaras, Maheshvara, the God supreme of gods, the King of kings, the supreme of the supreme, the Isha of the universe. 6:7. There is one other matter to be considered in the nature of the divine personality. God is spoken of both in masculine and in neuter, and that in the same verse, a peculiarity which is noticeable in modern Shaivism. And God is addressed in all forms as he, she, and it, Shiva, Shiva, and Shivam. And the reason is not as stated by Professor Max Mueller in his note under verse 16, chapter 3, that the gender changes frequently, according as the author thinks either of the Brahman or its impersonation as Isha, Lord, to the Indian whether he addresses his god as Shiva or Shivam, he is addressing the same supreme personality, who is neither male nor female nor neuter, and there is no jar to him in the sense as there will be to the Christian, who could only think of and address God in the masculine gender. The Upanishad does not recognize any difference between the use of it and he, and it does not contemplate that by using it instead of he, a higher being is reached. Coming now to the nature of the soul as set forth in this Upanishad, the first thing to be noticed is that the jiva is very often spoken of as Atma, simply and distinguished from God. The other appellation it receives are Purusha, Anisa, Ajna, the Hamsa, Vidya, and these are to distinguish it from the other, the Paramatma, the Parama Purusha, Isha, and Jna. This soul is bound because he is not God, 1:8, because he is ignorant of himself and of the self within him, the Antaratma. This soul is not self-dependent, 1:2. The soul is confined in the Pura, city body of 9 gates, i.e., is limited and flutters about, is changeable, and he enjoys the fruits, pleasures, and pains. Even pains are a pleasure to him, the ignorant soul, and fondly clings to the body and performs karma, 3:18. 4, 5, and 6. But he who is endowed with qualities and performs karma that are to bear fruit and enjoys the reward of whatever he has done, migrates through his own works, the Lord of life, assuming all forms, led by the 3 gunas and the 3 paths. 6:7. And yet this soul is of the image of God, is infinite and brilliant like the sun, endowed with Ichcha and Jnana, and is sinless. The Supreme One who witnesses all his doings, dwelling within him, without himself being tainted by the contact, helps to secure the ripening of his mala, and waits till the soul attains to that condition of perfect balancing in good and evil, verse 5:5, by the performance of charya, kriya, and yoga, good works, penance, and meditation, with love and knowledge, and the syllable pranava, he is blessed by the Lord. 1:6, and God's grace descends on him, and he knows and sees with manas the supreme grace of God, the spiritual eye, the Purusham Mahantam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parasat, and his fetters Pasha fall off, and suffering cease, and he enters the bliss of the supreme Brahman and eternal peace. That Ishvara Prasadam 320, or Anagraham, or grace, is necessary is a common belief of the people, and this doctrine is not peculiar to this Upanishad alone. The Katha Upanishad puts the same doctrine in much stronger language, that Atma, God, cannot be gained by the Veda, nor by understanding, nor by much learning. He whom Atma, God, chooses, by him the Atma, God, can be gained. 1, 2, and 3. But even the Supreme Almighty God cannot help him if he had not turned away from wickedness, and is not tranquil, subdued, and at rest, dedicating Arpanam all his words, deeds, and thoughts to God. 124. That the doctrine of bhakti is found well set forth in the oldest Upanishads and the Vedas will be apparent by reading the texts collated by Dr. Moyer in his learned metrical translations from Sanskrit under the heading of Shraddha and Bhakti. By the way, this Shraddha and Bhakti is not to be understood as a manifestation of feeling only at one stage of man's spiritual evolution and unnecessary at another stage, but this love is essential to the aspirant, whether he is a Dashamargi, Satputramargi, Yogamargi, or Jnanamargi. That these four paths grow one out of the other and are not independent, and each one of these is hardly possible to reach without going through the lower rungs of the ladder, we have already pointed out above. The Upanishads, all of them, discuss the particular upasana of upasanas which are required for the salvation of the bound soul, and these upasanas are called also vidyas. Of these various vidyas, what is called the Dahara upasana, or vidya, is the most favored of all the upasanas in the Svetasvatara and Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka, Katha, Mundaka, and Kaivalya, Atharvasika, and in the Bhagavad Gita. The references to this highest yoga practice are most numerous in the Upanishads, and the sameness of the various references form the subject of discussion in the Vedanta Sutras 3.323. The famous passages are what occur in the Chandogya Upanishad, commencing with the sentences, "There is the city of Brahman," 8.1.1. All this is Brahman. This worship or yoga consists in the aspirant contemplating in his heart the Supreme One as the person of light and as Akasha, as Sachidananda Parameshvara, with the particular formula that God is in all beings and all beings are in God, and various synonyms are used to denote this heart of man, such as Dahara, subtle, Guha, cave, Pandarika, lotus, Brahmapura, city, Hridaya, heart, and the meaning of the words Akasha and Vyoma has also to be carefully noted. They are synonymous and do not mean the Bhuta Akasha, nor the Maya Shakti or Avidya, but as interpreted by the Puranas themselves, they mean Chit or Jnana, or light or grace, which is the Parashakti of the Supreme Ishvara. That this Akasha is Chit and not Achit is further proved by the phrases Chitakasha and Chidambara, and this Chit Shakti is the Devatma Shakti of our Upanishad, which is inherent and concealed in him, 1.3, and the Supreme Shakti, which is revealed as manifold, inherent, Shiva, and manifesting as Kriya and Jnana, 6.8. It is this which is called Uma and Light and Bhargash and Shavitri and Gayatri. And when we understand, therefore, this Akasha as light and knowledge, the supreme Shakti of God, its description as the highest light, the revealer of all forms, the highest object of adoration, is clear. The description of God also as Akasha Shakti and as dwelling in Akasha Shakti will not be conflicting, as no distinction is made between sun and his light, much less between God and his power. It is this Jnana Shakti who gives to the Chetana and Achetana Prapancha its form and shape and life and love and light. But the substance, or upadana, out of which this prapancha is evolved is the maya, or pradana, which also dwelling in him is drawn out and drawn in by the supreme power, Shakti, with just the ease and dexterity of a spider which spins out or in, or of the magician who draws forth out of an empty basket fruits and flowers and sweets. The Maya, meaning also power, is also a Shakti of his, Maya Shakti, but differing from the other Shakti. Ichcha Jnana and Kriya, just as darkness differs from light, as darkness is necessary for rest and recuperation, so this power of God also works for our rest and recuperation and salvation. And God is called the Lord of Maya, Mayin, and beyond all forms of the tree, as transcending all the tattvas, kala, etc., and as transcending pradana. Why we are required to contemplate God as Akasha, light, or Chit, is that by this light alone we can know him. And as such light, and it is as light, Chit, God is immanent in the world and omnipresent. And this brings out again the reason why this Chit is called Akasha, the most subtle and invisible and omnipresent element we have in nature. God is present in all nature and pervades it, as oil in seeds, butter in ghee, and fire in wood, 115. And this all-pervasiveness is thus explained in a text of the Atharva Siras Upanishad. Why is it called Sharvavyapi? It is so called because, like ghee diffusing and soaking itself through and through, the ruda, milk or seed, it pervades every created thing through and through as warp and woof. And as by reason of this pervasiveness, nothing could be imagined as existing out of him, the whole is called also Brahman, the whole with the parts and limbs and bodies, 410, as the Chetana Achetana, Prapancha, as Anakarana, as Chit Shakti, and himself the soul of this vast whole, and as all of us from but parts of him, we are also enjoined to be kind to one another, for whatever we do to each other will be also done to his body. We quote the following from Srikanta Shivacharya's commentary, in which this point is discussed. All this is Brahman, as beginning, ending, and breathing in him, and therefore let a man meditate on him. This passage may be explained as follows. The origin, existence, and end of all this depends on Brahman. All this, both the sentient and insentient existence, is verily Brahman, and therefore let a man meditate on Brahman, tranquil in mind, just as the water bubbles, which have their origin, existence, and end in the ocean, are found to be only forms of that ocean, so too that which depends for its origin, etc., on Brahman associated with Shakti must be made of Brahman and nothing else. Nothing distinct from him is ever perceived. According in the Atharva Shiras, it has been declared by Ishana as follows. Alone I was at first, alone I am and shall be, there is none else distinct from me. And then was declared by him in the words, I am Brahman, and that the whole universe is his own form. And in the words, he entered the more hidden, from or than the hidden one, etc. His entering into the universe is given as a reason for the whole universe being his own form. Thus this universe, having no origin, existence, or end outside Brahman, is not a quite distinct thing from Brahman. Accordingly, the learned say, his Shaktis or energies form the whole world, and the Mahesha or the Great Lord is the energetic Shaktiman. Never can energy exist distinct from the energetic. Unity of these two is eternal, like that of fire and heat, inasmuch as unseparateness always exists between energy and the energetic. Wherefore supreme energy belongs to the supreme Atman, since the two are related to each other as substance and attribute. The energy of heat is not conceived to be distinct from fire, and so on. Vayu Samhita 2 says, Parva 25, chapter 18 and 19. From Shakti up to earth, the whole world is born of the principal Shiva. By him alone it is pervaded, as the jar, etc., by clay. His variegated supreme Shakti, whose form is knowledge and bliss, appears as one in many, like the light of the sun. The following passage of the Sruti speak of Parabrahman as possessed of infinite powers of creating, ruling, and maintaining the world, all inherent in him. His supreme Shakti is spoken of as manifold, inherent, endued with the activity of knowledge and life. Svetasvatara Upanishad 6:8. One verily is Rudra, they were not for a second, who rules these worlds with the powers of the ruling. 3:2. In short, on the authority of the Sruti, Smriti, Itihasa, Purana, and the saying of the learned, the Supreme Shakti, whose manifold manifestation, the whole universe of Chit and Achit, is whose being is composed of supreme existence, intelligence, and unlimited by space and time, is inherent in the nature of Shiva, the Supreme Brahman, and constitutes his own essential form and quality. Apart from Shakti, he cannot be the omniscient, the omnipotent, the cause of all, the all-controlling, the all-adorable, the all-gracious, the means of attaining all aspirations, and the omnipresent. And moreover, such grand designations as Maheshvara, the Supreme Lord, Mahadeva, the Supreme Deity, and Rudra, the expeller of pain, cannot apply to him. Thus it is Brahman, whose body is the whole sentient and insentient universe, and who is denoted by all words. Just as the word blue denotes not the blue color only, but also the lotus, which is of a blue color, so the word universe also denotes Brahman. Therefore such passages as all is Rudra verily teach that Brahman is denoted by all words. Accordingly, the passage, all this verily is Brahman, refers to Brahman whose body, the whole of the sentient and unsentient universe is, the universe being thus a form of Brahman, and being therefore not an object of hatred, etc. Let everyone be peaceful at heart and worship Brahman. This doctrine is clearly expounded even in the Puranic texts such as the following. The body of the God of gods is this universe, moving and unmoving. This the jivas, pashus, do not know, owing to the mighty bondage. They say sentiency is vidya and insentiency avidya. The whole universe of vidya and avidya form, no doubt, the body of the Lord, the first cause of all, for the whole universe is subject to him. The word sat is used by the wise to denote the real, and the good, asat, is used by Vedic teachers to denote the contrary. The whole universe of the sat and the asat is the body of him who is on high. Just as by the watering of the roots of a tree its branches are nourished, so by the worship of Shiva, the universe which is his body is nourished. Atman is the eighth body of Shiva, the Parameshvara, pervading all other bodies. Wherefore the whole universe is ensouled by Shiva. If any embodied being whatsoever be subjected to constraint, it will be quite repugnant to the eight-bodied Lord. As to this there is no doubt. Doing good to all, kindness to all, affording shelter to all, this they hold is the worshipping of Shiva, and so on. Brahman being all formed, it is but right to say all is Brahman, and everyone be peaceful and worship Brahman. Therefore it is Brahman who in the opening passage is stated to be the object of worship. That is also spoken of as Manomaya, as partaking of the nature of Manas, and so on. Neither should it be supposed that the partaking of the nature of Manas is a characteristic mark of a samsarin, for Brahman may limit himself by assuming a shape which can form an object of worship. That which therefore eternally rests within the Atma, 112, dwells in the cave of the heart of all beings, is the greater than the great, smaller than the small, hidden in the heart of the creature, 320, hidden in all beings like the subtle film, and subtler than subtle. The wise should seize in the body, heart, by means of the pranava within himself, and by the drill of meditation and penance. They should, with the mind towards the heart, love the old Brahman by the grace of Savitri, light or Chit Shakti, grasping by the Manas Shakti, and perceived by the heart, by the soul, by the mind, in the highest Turyatita plane, where Shiva dwells alone, the eternal and the adorable light. This most ancient of days, Shiva, the blissful and benign being, the great Purusha of sun-like brilliancy, dwelling in the highest Vyoma, then their fetters, Pasha, fall off. They will cross over to the other shore. After passing through the torrents that cause fear, their darkness, Ahankara, Anava, will vanish, and all material bodies, Maya, will fall off, and they will enter into the supreme bliss and peace. The various steps, psychological and spiritual, by which the sanctification of the soul is accomplished, is stated beautifully in 110. From meditating on him, from joining him, from becoming one with him, there is further cessation of all Maya, bodies, births, in the end. In a most beautiful address on the famous text of St. Paul, which runs, "We all, with unveiled face, reflecting as a mirror the glory of the Lord, are transformed into the same image, from glory to glory, even as from the Lord the Spirit." Professor Henry Drummond, who is said to have revolutionized Christian thought in the last few decades, calls these the laws of reflection and of assimilation. He instances the iron which gets magnetized and becomes a magnet, and a mirror getting rid of its dust, reflects the glorious light and becomes merged with it and lost. And he remarks, all men are mirrors. That is the first law on which this formula is based. One of the aptest descriptions of a human being is that he is a mirror, and our Upanishad contains fortunately the selfsame description and illustration. As a metal disc, mirror, tarnished by dust, shines bright again after it has been cleaned, so is the one incarnate person satisfied and freed from grief after he has seen the real pure nature of himself. And when by the real nature of his self he sees as by a lamp the real nature of the Brahman, then having known the unborn eternal God, who transcends all the tattvas, he is freed from all fetters, Pasha. The first text would simply read in Drummond's language, see, reflect, and become God. It only remains for us now to point out that the second verse of the first Adhyaya is mistranslated by Rohr, Max Muller, Mead, and others. They contain terms which are not known to the systems they are familiar with, and they are alone preserved in the Siddhanta system. The terms are Kala, Svabho, Niyati, Ichcha, Bhuta, Yoni, Purusha, and they are also referred to as Yonisvabho, etc. in 5.4 and in 6.1, Svabho and Kala. We stated that the different schools differed in the enumeration of the tattvas or categories, but most of them stopped with Prakriti or Pradhana and Purusha, the highest in their list, the 24th and 25th principle. See Sentinathayar's Table of Tattvas, published in Madras 1899, but the Siddhanta school postulated above this other tattvas or principles, making up the whole number into 36. These higher tattvas were Ragam, Ichcha, Vidya, Niyati, Kala, constituting what is called the souls, the Purushas Pancha Kanchakam, Maya Sudha Vidya, Maheshvara, Sadashiva, Bindu or Shakti, and Nadam, Shiva, and the terms used in our text is Kala, Svabho or Kala, Niyati, Ichcha or Ragam, Bhuta or Vidya, and Yoni or Sudha Maya, and Purusha or soul. That our interpretation is genuine we could show by quoting the authority of the author of a Purana, who at any rate is anterior to all the commentators whose explanations we now possess. The following occurs in Kailasa Samhita or Vayu Purana, and it refers to the Svetasvatara text. Purushayatu Bhaktritvam Pratipamasya Bojanecha Prayatnata Atarangata Yatatva Panchakam Prakirtitam Nigate Kala Ragasha Nidyacha Tadanantaram Kala Chupanchakamidam Mayopanam Munishvara Mayantu Prakritim Vidya Mayashruti Etrita Tajanigetani Tatvani Shruti Yuktani Nasamsaya Katasva Bhavoni Yatriti Cha Shrutirabhavid Etat Panchakam Evasya Panchakanchuka Muchyate Ajanan Pancha Tatvani Vidvanapi Vimudadi Niyadyahastat Prabrute Ruparashtita Pumanayam Vidyatatvamidam Proktam. The following verse occurs in the Brahmana Purana, Purusha Niyati, Kalaragasha Kala Vidyecha Mayaya, and this is from Vayu Samhita, Mayu Kalamavasrujat Niyatinsha Kalam Vidyam Kalato Ragapurushao, a chapter from the Kural. Nobody who has the least insight into the pages of the sacred Kural will fail to endorse the remark of the veteran Tamil scholar, Reverend Dr. G.U. Pope, that this is a work unparalleled in any language. The merits of the work are so apparent that even at its very birth it received the highest encomiums of the proudest scholars of the day, the pundits of the far-famed Madura College or Sangam. The tradition that the author was of low birth only heightens the value of the appreciations thus showered on him. One of the collegians compares it to the Veda, and another says, unlike the Veda, Tiruvallur's words do not lose their merit by anybody repeating them. One speaks of it as containing everything worth knowing, and another that there is nothing which is not contained in this work. One says that the words are sweeter than the heavenly ambrosia, and unlike the latter can be partaken of by everybody. And as the poet utters these words, even our own mouth begins to water. Another says they are sweet food to the mind, sweet to the ear, and sweet to the tongue, and the great panacea for the ills of karma. One compares it to the sun, which, dispelling the deep darkness of ignorance, makes the lotus of the heart bloom forth. Another compares it to the lamp dispelling our mental darkness, with the oil can of dharma, and wick of artha, and ghee of kama, words of perfection, the flame, and the short meters, the lampstand, its brevity not bordering on unintelligibility or ambiguity, as do most of the sutras in Sanskrit, its perfection of expression and style, its deepness are all matters taken up for praise by these learned collegians. And what is more, the poet Kaladar brings out in this verse its most prominent character, its universality. People wrangle about this or that being the truth, and they range themselves into various schools, but all are agreed about the truth of the words uttered by Tiruvallur. And since his time, all religionists, Buddhists and Jains, Shaivas and Vaishnavas, have all claimed him as their own, and we need not inquire wherefrom he derived his truths. It is enough to acknowledge that it is perfection of truth, if one can say so, a perfect ethical and religious code, a perfection of art and thought. Indeed, a close study of the work will bring out its perfect scientific basis, and each part, and each chapter, and each verse is placed one after the other in a perfect chain of logical arrangement and argument, and may we hope that some ardent student of the Kural will work out from it a perfect theory of ethics, both private and international. One more remark, and this will introduce us to the chapter of the book we have taken up for translation and elucidation. It is usually remarked, following the main divisions of the book into Dharma, Artha, and Kama, that the author has left out the discussion of the last Purushartha or moksha, on the ground that religion is a matter which will give room for difference and dispute. But it is true that there are no universal truths of religion, and did our author leave them unsaid? His own contemporaries did not understand him as doing so, but have stated in their encomiums that he has explained all the four Purusharthams and that he has shown the path to moksha. And the Reverend Dr. Pope, in his short paper on the ethics of Kural, holds that Tiruvallur bases his ethics on the grand truths of Tripadartha, Pathi, Pashu, and Pasha. In fact, his creed is not a godless creed like that of the Jains or Buddhists. In this respect, there is disparity between the Naladi and his work. Our author's God is the first cause and Lord. He is intelligent. He resides in the heart of his creatures. He is immaculate, untainted by likes and dislikes. He is the Lord of lords and King of kings. He is incomparable. He is the source of all dharma and beneficent. He has 8 attributes, i.e. self-dependent or self-possessed, the pure, self-luminous, the all-knowing, the ever-free, the beneficent, the infinitely powerful and infinitely blissful. Paramelalagar, rejects all other interpretations of and the eternal truth and the perfect and good being. No amount of learning is of any good unless a man believes in the existence of God and worships his feet in all love and truth. And without such knowledge and such conduct, the mere attaining of ethical perfection is of no use. The true way to get rid of our bonds is to reach the feet of the ever-free, and these bonds are not mere myths, but they are caused by our own ignorance. Avidya, ahankara, or anava, which is eternal, anadi, and then the chain of causation following karma into endless births and suffering is worked out, and the means of sadhana required to get freed from these bonds are fully shown. And of all the means, the greatest sadhana is to reach him who is past all thought and speech, and unless this is done, it is useless to hope to get our cares destroyed. And as all these principles are fully explained in chapter 36 on how to perceive truth, we have translated the same below, adopting almost the language of Dr. G.U. Pope, together with the famous commentary of Paramela Lagar, with some running notes to show how far this is embodied in the Advaita Siddhanta. Of course, the language of the Kural is the language of the Shaivite writers of the past 2,000 years, and no wonder the truths expounded by all of them should be the same. How to perceive truth. That is, we know the truth when we know the nature of birth and freedom, moksha, and the causes thereof, free from error and doubt. This the Sanskritists call tattvajnana, as this knowledge arises after desiring the desire of him who has no desire. This chapter is placed in consequence after the chapter on sannyasa, the delusion whereby men deem that the truth which is not, that is the cause of hapless birth. Paramalalagar's commentary. This delusion consists in believing such books and doctrines which hold that there is no rebirth, no fruits of both kinds of karma, and that there is no God, and such like, to be the true books and doctrines. This is delusive belief. This delusive belief is the same as when one mistakes one thing for another, a block for a man, shell for silver. Delusion, error, avidya, or ignorance are all synonymous words, as it is only sorrow that is reaped in all the four kinds of birth, as devas, men, animal, and astrals. This couplet explains that birth is sorrowful, and avidya or error is its cause. Note, by altering only a single letter in the first line, an A into E, the meaning of the whole passage will be altered, and we will have a new system of philosophy directly opposed to our authors. Instead of it being then the truth, it will become the opposite of it. This is the same question which has arisen in interpreting the negative prefix in the word Advaita. This A or na is interpreted in two ways, either as meaning not or no, though the distinction in the English equivalents will not be very apparent. Siddhantins, of course, accept the former interpretation, and most followers of Shankara prefer the latter one. This latter view involves the negation of one of the two, or maybe both of the postulates in Advaita. Over this question, a huge war has raged, and volumes have been written by the late Srila Sri Somasundara Nayagar and his followers on one side, and the late Ratna Chetiyar and of his ilk on the other side. Anyhow, St. Tiruvallur's meaning is clear. He does not mean to repudiate anything as unreal or non-existent. To him, delusion or error consists in mistaking one existent thing as the shell for another existent thing as silver. To him, to know the truth is to understand the true nature of each one thing. The question of reality or unreality does not come in. Only one must not mistake one thing for the other or doubt its nature. It will be sufficient requirement of the definition if one understands the true nature of God and man and the world, and one need not believe any of these to be unreal. One of such truths is that birth is sorrowful. This can be proved to be true, but one's ignorance or delusion comes when one takes this actual sorrow as happiness. You think that with this body there is an end altogether, when in fact there are future births. Believing that there is no future life and future birth, one does not believe that there can be a soul, and if there is one thinks the body itself is the soul, and believing so, all one's energies in this world are directed solely towards what would procure the greatest pleasure and gratification of one's senses, and one does not care what means one adopts, provided one's passions are gratified. As it is, the whole foundation of morality will be undermined, and one need have neither fear of men nor of God. All this is the result of want of knowledge of the true nature of his body and himself, and this ignorance is the cause of his birth. This ignorance is a fact, and to believe that this ignorance is itself unreal will be error or false knowledge. It is only when a man knows that he is ignorant that he will learn and try to remove his ignorance. But can this ignorance be removed? Yes. If so, how? This question is answered in the next couplet. Darkness departs, and rapture springs to men who see the mystic vision pure from all delusion free. Paramalalar's commentary. Darkness is hell. The mystic vision pure is the supreme object of knowledge. By this couplet it is explained that by freedom is meant Niratisayananda and the Nimitta Karana, for this, the supreme being. Note. Darkness and ignorance, light and knowledge have at all times and in all climes been used synonymously, and no two things are so analogous in nature as these two pairs of words. When will darkness vanish? When the sun rises. When will the sun rise? After the night is past. When will ignorance cease? When the source of all lights arises in his heart. When will this be? When he has attained to a well-balanced mind. The Pasachayam and Pathijnanam are distinct facts, though the first is not possible without the second. This couplet answers all those who say if the ignorance was eternally attached to the soul, it cannot be removed, and even if it be removed, what follows is only a blank, and that no divine power is required to give one freedom. This couplet in verse 4 below, which gives a most distinct reply to the Buddhist view, will remove all doubts as to whether he is a Siddhanta or a Buddhist or a Jain. But some of these truths, even when known to a man, doubt often oppresses him, environed by a host of dogmatists, whom each asserts his own dogma is the only truth. In the next couplet it is stated that even this doubt is the cause of birth, and the means of getting rid of this doubt is also stated. When doubts disperse and clearness is gained, nearer is heaven than earth to sage's soul. Paramalalar's commentary. Doubt is knowing a thing variously. That is doubting if there is or is not God and karma and rebirth, and without definite belief in anything. This is the same as doubting a thing is water or a mirage, rope or a snake, as it is natural to every system to refute other doctrines and establish its own. The doubts arising from such a multitude of doctrines, those sages well practiced in yoga will remove by their svanubhuti or experience, and attain to real knowledge, and hence they are called. As they reach higher and higher yogic experience, their attachment to the world grows less and less. Hence the author's statement that heaven is nearer, etc. By this couplet is explained that doubtful knowledge is a cause of birth. Note. Yoga is a means and not an end. Till yoga merges into knowledge, no real knowledge is gained. Even the highest yoga is no good unless the final goal is reached, from whence there is no return. The attainment of yoga is really difficult, but this is not all. One can subdue his passions and desires and control his senses, but unless he has the vision pure, the only truth, then this attainment will be only for a time, and the man will again be a prey to his senses. To meet this special Buddhist view that the attainment of mere extinction of all desires is nirvana, and that there is no such thing as Brahma nirvana, is the special object of the next couplet. Fivefold perception gained, what benefits accrue to them whose spirit lacks perception of the true? Paramalalar's commentary. Fivefold perception is the manas. By gained is meant the controlling of the manas and concentrating of it in dharana. As training of this alone is not sufficient, the author says there is no benefit, and he brings out how difficult a feat even this attainment of dharana is. By these two couplets, the greatness of pratijnana is explained by pointing out that without this attainment no moksha is possible, and the nature of this patijnana is the subject of the next couplet. Whatever thing, of whatever kind it be, 'tis wisdom's part in each the real thing to see. Paramalagar's commentary. That is, one must perceive the truth immanent in everything, after getting rid of our ordinary notions of them. In this phrase, the words may mean ordinary, the name of King Saruman of a particular description, but they may mean more particularly the tattvas from earth to Purusha. When examined and rendered into their final causes, what finally remains is none of this cause and effect, but the highest truth, and his knowledge is the true knowledge. By this couplet is explained the nature of this true knowledge. Note: this is one of the most oft-quoted couplets of Kural, and is put to more general use than what is intended here. One has not to go far to discover the Supreme Being and know him. He is in everything, but one must lose light of the apparent to gain the real. God is in the earth, but the earth is not God. God is in water, but water is not God. And so through every tattva. And lastly, God is in the soul, but the soul is not God. When one has so learned to discriminate and distinguish, then only will he attain to patijnanam. In the next three couplets, the sadhana required for attaining this patijnanam is given, and the first requisite is hearing or learning. Who learns and hear the knowledge of the true obtain shall find the path that cometh not again. Paramalagar's commentary. By learn, the earth means learning from everybody and at all times. By here, the author brings out the greatness of human birth, wherefrom alone one can attain moksha. The path that cometh not again is the path to moksha, the means or sadhana for knowing the first cause. The cause of one's attaining moksha are of three kinds. They are hearing of study, reflection, bhavana or realizing, in Sanskrit Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. This couplet explains Sravana. Note: though the commentator's idea of what is to be learnt is very large, yet the correction conveyed in the following stanza of Naladiyar is important. In this matchless verse, says Dr. Pope, not a syllable could be spared, while almost every word is common and easy, yet is the very fittest and is used in its exact meaning. It is somewhat archaic, has a fascinating air of mystery, pleasantly exercises and amply rewards the student's ingenuity, seems dark at first, but once lit up, sparkles forever. This shore suggests a metaphor. Learning is a shoreless infinite ocean. Then comes the simple antithesis. The learner's days are few. In Tamil, the use of the same root twice, and again in the third line, imports an added charm. Into these perfectly to Tamil ears harmonious lines is compressed a whole chapter. The subject of study, with a plural verb, is infinitely numerous, but the learner's days are few, and if it be calmly thought out, men are liable to many diseases, natural infirmities or bonds that enfeeble and restrict. Youthful enthusiasm may lead men to anticipate great and varied triumphs. Calm reflection teaches them their natural weakness. So men should learn with discrimination, examining closely things befitting, suit, satisfy, gladden them, with intelligence, like that of the bird, the semi-divine Hamsa that drinks only the milk and leaves the water, when these mingled are presented to it. The mind that knows with certitude what is first cause and ponders well its thoughts on birth again to other life need not to dwell. Commentary. This explains Manana. When the folly of desiring birth departs, the soul can view the exalted home of the good being. This is wisdom true. Paramalagar's commentary. Birth and ignorance and exalted home and truth are really related as effect and cause. They are given inversely in this couplet. Of the five faults, as ignorance is the cause of even the other faults, the author has stated this as the cause of birth. As moksha is higher than all other things, it is spoken of as the exalted. The first cause is spoken of as the good being, inasmuch as he is eternal without birth and death, as all other things are too insignificant to taint him by their contacts, and as he remains the same without change or taint at all times, though immanent in all all things. Hence also he is spoken of above as the true being and the existent. The viewing is the soul losing its mala by constantly realizing or practicing bhavana so that it may become one with God. This bhavana is also called samadhi or shukla dhyana, as it is commonly held by all schools of people that the soul, when it leaves the body, becomes that which it fancied at the time, is born assuming that body to which it yearned at the time of death, and so too as it is necessary for people who aspire after moksha to contemplate on the transcendent being, so that their thoughts on birth may cease. There is no better means than this sadhana for practice beforehand always. This bhavana is explained in this couplet. Note: the commentator proves his thesis by taking the common form of belief held by all people. Everyone believes that the form he sees, the object he is after, the idea which possesses him at the moment of one's death, will give him a similar form at the future birth, and stories are current about a rishi who was fondling a deer, being born a deer, etc. But these do not know on what principle this is based, and except in the Siddhanta works, this principle is nowhere expounded. The principle involved regards the nature of the soul, which is stated briefly and tersely by Saint Mikandar as that becomes, that to which it is attached, by Saint Arulnandi, which is paraphrased again by Saint Tayamanavar. Like the dirt-removed crystal, which becomes of the nature of that to which it is attached, Saint Tiruvallvar himself has clearly expressed this principle in the verse of the last chapter, and in the second verse of this chapter, and in the next verse, and verses 4, 5, 7, and 8 of the first chapter, wherein he shows that unless the soul leaves its clinging to one, it cannot cling to another, from whence is deduced the principle that the soul cannot have any independent existence or form, unless it is clinging to one thing, the world or body in bandha, or the other, God in moksha, and while so attached, it identifies itself so thoroughly that it is impossible to discover its separate personality. Hence it was that a Tyndall and Huxley and a Bain, with all their minute anatomical, biological, and psychological analysis, were not able to discover a mind in the body different from the body, though they could feel that the result was not very satisfactory. The express language used by the commentator, as will appear from the beautiful stanza we quote below from Saint Arulnandi, will show to whom he is indebted for the explanation. The word bhavana is important. Bhavana, sadhana, dhyana, yoga are all more or less synonymous terms. It means practice by symbolic meditation or realization. You fancy fixedly you are one with that, and you become that. And this is the principle which underlies all the Mahavakyas, Tattvamasi, etc. For fuller treatment, see Shivajnana Bodham and the Siddhanta Dipika, Volume 2, the article Mind and Body. The true support who knows rejects support he sought before. Sorrow that clings shall cease and cling to him no more. Paramalalagar's commentary. Conduct or practice here means practice of yoga. This yoga is of 8 kinds: yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyakara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Their explanations are too long to be given here. See them in the books on yoga. The sorrows that cling to us are the fruits of karma, which have yet to be experienced, which are the result of infinite karma performed in births dating from eternity, and which give rise to fruits already eaten in past births and in the present birth, shall cease and cling no more, as they will vanish before yoga and jnana like darkness before light. This Jains call disease. As even good karma is the seed of birth, it is called a disease. The author holds that births will cease when the Supreme is perceived by the above-mentioned 3 means. When the births cease, what can all the ills do, as they cannot cling to these jnanis well practiced in yoga, and there being no support they will die. This is the purport of the stanza. Note: the word in the verse and in the previous chapter means a support or hold. The soul has two such supports, one in bandha and one in moksha, and without such supports it cannot stand. This may be compared to a piece of iron held between two magnetic poles, one positive and one negative, or better still to a fruit growing on a tree. The fruit is held up by the tree so long and so long only as it is raw and immature, undeveloped. But so soon as it is ripe, it reaches the ground, force of gravity. Fruit, as such, must be united to the tree or the ground. What happens is, as the fruit grows riper and riper, the sap of the tree does not rise up to the twig, and the twig dies, and it falls off. So too, as man rises higher, and his desire of the world decreases, and the bonds are sundered, he drops into the feet of the Lord. The author explains, as dhyana and as samadhi the highest jnana yoga practices. In the next verse, this Pashachaya is further explained. Paramalalagar's commentary. The eternal ignorance, avidya, the consequent ahankara, the feeling of I and mind, the hankering which desires this or that, the eternal desire of this or that object, and dislike or hate arising from unsatisfied desire, these five faults are enumerated by Sanskritists. The author enumerates only three, as ahankara can be brought under avidya, and hankering can be comprised under desire, as these faults are burnt up before jnana yoga practices, like cotton before a wildfire. So the author speaks of the disappearance of the very names of these three faults, as those who do not commit these faults will not commit good or bad karma caused by them. The author states accordingly in this verse that they suffer no pain therefrom. As a result of the attainment of true knowledge, the ills of past births and of future births are destroyed. And thus these two verses find a place in this chapter. We learn from this also that what remains to those who have perceived the truth is the present body and ills attaching thereto. Note, and the next chapter discusses the means of even getting rid of this bare bodily infirmity and of guarding against what is called Vasaramala. The analogies in the Gita. Analogy is very largely used in the elucidation and explanation of various principles in Oriental philosophy, and with more or less effect. In most cases they serve a very important function, and many truths there are, which by reason of their dealing with the ultimate existences, can alone be demonstrated by such analogies, and not by any other kind of proof. In the use of such analogies there are great dangers also, and the analogy may look so plausible that one is apt to be carried away by it, without noting the inherent flaws in it, and which a little closer investigation will clearly bring out. Care should, however, be taken to distinguish between analogies which are merely similes or metaphors, based on a mere semblance, and intended merely to bring home to our minds the subject matter in a more impressive and clearer light, and analogies strictly so called, intended as proof. In the latter case, mere semblance alone will not do, and there must be sameness in the various parts of the illustration and the thing illustrated. Neglect of this rule often leads to great confusion and error in thought. If for the particular inference desired the antecedents conform to the antecedents in the analogy, the inference will be quite justified if it conforms to the consequence in the analogy, and it would be simply illogical to strain the illustration to other purposes and to extremes. Analogy at best is but an indifferent kind of proof, and where we do not take the proper precautions in using it, its value in philosophic argument will be almost nothing. Another source of error in the use of analogies by Indian writers is the brevity of expressions which is characteristic of such analogies, as we meet them in some of the most ancient books, where the analogy is taken literally, without supplying the necessary parts and ellipses, they cannot but lead one astray. There is one school of philosophers in India who are inordinately fond of these similes, and who at almost every step seek the aid of a simile to help them out of their position, and these similes have now only become too much hackneyed, and they pass from mouth to mouth, and even educated persons repeat them parrot-like, who would easily find out the fallacy if the matter is only put before them for a moment. We expected at least those learned in the lore of the West to explain their subject, instead of building all their argument on the strength of these doubtful similes, and in this respect even European scholars are not without reproach. For what shall we say of a scholar like Dr. Paul Deussen, if he gives expression to the following false analogy? Says he, and then for him, when death comes, no more samsara, he enters into Brahman, like streams into the ocean. He leaves behind him nama and rupa. He leaves behind him individuality, but he does not leave behind him his Atman, his self. It is not the falling of the drop into the infinite ocean. It is the whole ocean becoming free from the fetters of ice, returning from its frozen state to that what it is really and has never ceased to be, to its own all-pervading, eternal, almighty nature. In these few lines he crowds together as many fallacies as there are words in it, and we have neither the time nor patience to indicate all of them. We will, however, point out the most glaring of them. The soul returning from its migrations to its resting place, its final goal was the stream returning to the bosom of the mighty ocean. When the stream joins the ocean, it loses its name and form. Does it really do so, and if it did, what of that? How is it in any way changed? What we generally call a stream is a small body of water flowing between two banks. The water by itself, without its local connection, cannot be called the stream. The moment the water leaves its local connection, it ceases to be called stream. So it is not really the stream that flows into the ocean, but that the water of the stream flowed into and mixed with the water of the ocean. What makes really the difference between the ocean and the stream is the difference in the largeness and smallness of the respective bodies, and the largeness and smallness of the receptacle. The water in either receptacle is acted on by the sun and wind, is tempest-tossed and discolored and made muddy. The juggle by which the learned doctor converts the stream water, nay, a drop, into a mighty ocean, is not manifest in the illustration. The drop or the stream water is the drop or the stream water in the bosom of the ocean, though for the time being we are unable to distinguish its identity. When the identity is lost, its individuality is not seen, is lost in a sense also. The water remains as water and has not lost its nama and rupa, though this water gets other names by other accidents. It is the accident that determines the most specific name, and we will have to inquire how the thing acquired this accident or became carded from it. Then we come to the figure of the frozen ocean and the free ocean. Here is a jump from one figure to another. The bound soul was formerly the stream, and the freed soul the ocean. In either case, we observed above, the two bodies of water were subject to the same changeability and disabilities, except that one was larger than the other. Now the bound soul is the frozen ocean, and the freed soul is the ocean after it had thawed. And the learned doctor speaks of the fetters of ice. What does it matter to the ocean whether it was in a frozen condition or otherwise? How does it cease to be almighty, all-pervading, and eternal when it is frozen than when it was not? One would think that if the ocean's wishes were to be consulted, it would much better like to be frozen than not, as it would not be subjected to the mercy of the wind and the sun and the moon. Water is water whether it remains a liquid or a gas or a solid substance, and it would be mere rhetoric to ascribe fetters to it, and this fetter is real or fancied, either an evil or a good. If real and an evil, how did this fetter happen to be put on? If not, why try to get rid of the fetter? The fetter was put on by the ocean's own will or by another will more powerful still. If the ocean put it on by its own will, it may do so again, and this is no inducement for anybody to try to get rid of this fetter, and the strongest support of pure mortality, the greatest consolation in the sufferings of life and death, would surely be undermined.